I knew my marriage was over the night my wife texted me by accident. She meant it for him. It came to me. 10 words, and everything I believed about my life collapsed. That text landed at 9:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. I was cleaning up after poker night, beer bottles, chip crumbs, half-eaten nachos, when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I expected it heading to bed, or don't forget to lock the garage. Instead, it said, God, I miss the way you hold my wrists. No context. No typo. No doubt. I read it 3 times before I set the phone down. Not gently. In that moment, I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't even move. Because sometimes pain doesn't arrive like a punch. It arrives like a mirror cracking. Silently. Irreversibly. My name is Jack Dempsey. I'm 56 years old, and for the past 2 decades, I've been married to Erin, the quietest woman in any room. We live in Asheville, North Carolina. I run an outdoor supply store that I built from the ground up. Dempsey Outfitters. You've probably seen the billboards, Go Wild with Jack. People around here think I'm a good time guy. The life of the party. Handshakes, bear hugs, free samples at the fishing expos. They're not wrong. But they don't know what happens when the party's over. When the jokes stop, and you head home to someone who looks through you like you're made of dust. Erin's 51. Cold, rational, always 2 steps ahead. She works in financial compliance. She speaks in full stops and measured tones. The kind of woman who drinks hot tea in 90-degree weather and checks credit scores for fun. We made no sense. And for a long time, I told myself that was why it worked. We met the year I turned 35. I was dating a bartender who could quote Bukowski and punch out grown men. Erin was her upstairs neighbor. Our meet cute was more of a meet curt. She knocked on my door holding a rent check I'd accidentally dropped. Didn't smile. Didn't introduce herself. Just held it out and said, try stapling next time. I married her 2 years later. I used to tell that story like it was cute. Funny. How opposites attract kind of deal. I don't tell it anymore. Erin and I had been drifting for years. I blamed the stress. Her job. The long hours. I thought the distance was just fatigue, the way life wears you down until you collapse into separate silences on the same couch. But after that text, the silence felt loaded. The cold made sense. And the timeline shifted in my head. I remembered the wedding ring she stopped wearing because of a rash. The business trips that suddenly became 3 days instead of 2. The photo on her phone she said was from a co-worker's cabin, but it looked more like a couple's Airbnb, with 2 champagne glasses on the railing. I'd buried all of it. Because she wasn't the type to cheat. She wasn't warm, or spontaneous, or even affectionate. Erin was organized, disciplined, sensible. But that's the mistake people make. They think cheating's about passion. Sometimes it's just strategy. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I replied to the text with 3 words. Wrong person, Erin. She never answered. She came home late the next evening. Said she'd stopped by the grocery store. No mention of the message. No change in tone. Just that same polite, practiced smile she wore like a uniform. I studied her as she unpacked soup cans and sparkling water. She knew I saw it. And she was daring me to say something. So I did what any self-respecting man would do. I started digging. Not with spyware. Not with stakeouts or GPS tags. That's TV nonsense. I looked for real-world trails. She kept her passwords on a folded sticky note inside a cookbook she never touched. I found her iCloud login there. From that, I got access to her Notes app, synced across devices. That's where she made lists. She was big on lists. Always had been. One was labeled G Travel. Inside were dates, cities, hotel names, cross-referenced with my business trips. 2019, Charlotte, Kimpton Tryon. 2020, Savannah, and as Riverfront. 2021, Chapel Hill, Carolina, and every single one aligned with weekends I was out of town. And there were initials. GT Meeting Room 303. G, brunch at 11, bring navy dress. She never calls me G. Never has. But here's what really shattered me. In another note, she'd written, when I'm with him, I remember who I used to be. That was the line that crushed my chest like a cinder block. Because she hadn't just betrayed me. She preserved a version of herself only for him. And for the last 4, maybe 5 years, she'd been slipping away in fragments. Like a glacier melting so slowly you don't realize the coastline's changing until your house falls into the sea. I couldn't stop thinking about it. About how many times I'd kissed her neck while she was imagining someone else's hands. How many meals I'd cooked while she was dreaming of a hotel buffet with G. How many times she'd watched me light up a room, only to roll her eyes and text him afterward. He never shuts up. Because here's the thing, I know she talks about me. I found part of an email she drafted and never sent. It was saved as a PDF in a Dropbox folder named Personal Docs. It read, "Jack is exhausting. He's like a golden retriever that needs constant validation." I used to think it was charming. Now I find myself counting the minutes. I read that sentence 15 times. She never sent it, but she wrote it. That was enough. People ask me now, how did I keep my cool? How did I not confront her on the spot? Not blow the whole thing wide open? It's simple. Because I know Erin. And Erin doesn't respond to shouting, or sobbing, or chaos. She respects control, planning, precision, and if she wanted out, fine. But I was going to show her what control looks like. I started slow. Stopped talking about the future. Stopped inviting her to store events. Stopped asking where she was going or when she'd be back. She noticed. She thought it was distance. That I was retreating. Good. Let her feel what it's like to be invisible. 2 weeks later, I made an appointment with a divorce attorney. Not to file, yet. Just to learn. I learned about asset tracing. I learned about long-term infidelity and fault-based leverage in court. I learned about marital dissipation and how money spent on an affair could come back in a big way. I learned that Erin had no idea what was coming, because the quietest woman in the room had underestimated the loudest man she'd ever meet. And when I was done, I'd leave her in silence. But not before the whole town heard what she did. I stopped talking to her 3 weeks ago. Not the dramatic kind of silence. No slam doors, no icy shoulders. Just the kind of silence that builds up like dust in corners. A slow fade into invisibility. We still exchange the logistics. Don't forget your keys. I moved the laundry. Gas tank's low. But everything real, the little touches, the glances, the questions that made us a marriage instead of a shared mortgage. I buried all of that. And the strangest thing? She didn't even notice it was gone. Erin always preferred things that didn't speak. Books. Quiet music. Terrariums. She used to say silence was her sanctuary. Now I was giving her a cathedral. I stopped telling jokes. Stopped humming while I cooked. Stopped trying to be seen. And Erin? She floated through the house like someone renting space until her real life resumed. It made me wonder how long she'd been waiting to leave. Or worse, how long she thought I wouldn't notice. But I did notice. And I started digging. Not with surveillance equipment or some spy movie nonsense. Just simple, believable steps. I found the sticky note she kept tucked in the back of an old cookbook, her iCloud password, same one she used for years. Erin always believed digital calendars were too vulnerable. But her notes app? That was where she lived. Inside, I found a folder labeled G Travel. It wasn't even hidden, just tucked beneath grocery lists and work memos. I opened it, and there it was. Charlotte, Savannah, Chapel Hill, Durham. Each city matched one of my trips, times when I was out of town, giving her all the runway she needed. Most damning? A note that read, G Friday, room 303. Don't forget navy dress. He had a letter, a room number, a dress code. She had a whole other life. I still didn't know who he was, just that he was precise. Careful. Digital fingerprints mostly wiped. But I wasn't going to dig alone. So I reached out to someone I never expected to, Lydia, Erin's younger sister. Now that was a gamble. Lydia and I were never close. She used to joke that I was Asheville's most extroverted Labrador. Said I talked too much, moved too fast, lived too loud. But a few weeks back, I ran into her at an artisan bakery near the River Arts District. She looked tired, softer than I remembered. Her usual edge had melted into something quieter. Wiser, maybe. She'd been divorced for a year. No kids. No drama. Just a slow, mutual uncoupling. Turns out marrying a man for his jawline doesn't pan out long-term, she'd said with a sad smile, wiping almond flour off her hands. We ended up talking for nearly an hour that day. About everything. And somehow, nothing about Erin. It felt good to talk to someone who didn't see me as a noise machine. So when this whole thing with Erin started unraveling, she was the only one I trusted to ask the one thing I couldn't Google. I invited Lydia to lunch. Not under false pretenses, no anniversary surprises or white lies. I just said I needed someone to talk to, and that she might understand more than most. She showed up at the little place off Merrimont I liked. Outdoor tables, good iced tea, no rush. When she sat down, she looked at me for a long time before saying anything. Then she said, "You look like someone who hasn't slept." I nodded. I haven't. For about 5 years. She tilted her head. So it's that bad. I didn't say yes. I just took out my phone, opened one of Erin's travel notes, and slid it across the table. She stared at it. Didn't blink. Didn't ask if it was a mistake. She just said, quietly, Greg Tanner. I didn't answer. Lydia sat back, ran a hand through her hair, the same shade as Erin's but without the gloss and tight styling. I always wondered, she said. About him. She shook her head. About her. She told me she'd suspected something. Erin had become different in the last few years. Sharper. Defensive. Almost cruel at times. She used to make fun of women who lived double lives, Lydia said, picking at her lemon salad. And then one day, I realized she was one of them. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt hollow. Then she looked up at me, something softer in her eyes. You didn't deserve this, Jack. It hit harder than I expected. Not because it was dramatic, but because she meant it. We didn't talk about what came next. Not that day. Instead, we walked around downtown for a while. Stopped for coffee. Talked about nothing, music, old movies, how I used to try growing tomatoes and always forgot to water them. There was something easy about it. Not flirtatious. Not romantic. Just kind. It had been a long time since someone looked at me without judgment or exhaustion. And I saw something in her too, loneliness, sure. But also clarity. Strength earned the hard way. And I realized. She saw me. Not Jack the performer. Not Jack the husband. Just me. That night, Erin came home late from work drinks. Her lipstick was uneven. Her perfume was different. She didn't say where she'd been. And for once, I didn't ask. I just looked at her, knowing I'd already started building something she couldn't erase. And I wasn't talking about a case. I was talking about a life without her. Over the next week, I started compiling everything. Photos of receipts, Uber charges, hotel confirmation emails she forgot to delete from the trash folder. I opened a private bank account, funneled a quiet trickle of money from my business, just enough to start separating clean lines from joint ones. I visited the attorney again, Gina Luttrell. Smart, blunt, and surgical. She looked at the folder I handed her and said, "You're either the pettiest man I've ever met, or the most prepared." I smiled. Why not both? I wasn't planning on ambushing Erin. Not yet. I wasn't going to beg, scream, or even confront. Because I wasn't interested in answers anymore. I was interested in consequences. And they were coming. One quiet day at a time. When I suggested we throw an anniversary party, Erin hesitated. Just for a second. Then she said, "I thought we agreed to keep things simple this year." We hadn't. But I nodded anyway. Just friends. Nothing big. She blinked once, slow. "Jack." "People will ask," I said, walking toward the kitchen. 20 years. They'll expect something. She didn't argue. Just poured herself a glass of water, sat at the table, and stared at nothing. I watched her from the hallway. She looked caged. And it was the first time in years that she didn't look like she was the one holding the key. I set the date for 3 weeks out. Sent the invites myself, paper and digital. Handwritten notes to the ones who mattered. All phrased the same way. Join us in celebrating 20 years of life, love, and the stories we don't always tell. Subtle. Personal. Loaded. Everyone RSVP'd fast. We'd always been the solid couple. The ones people pointed to as proof that opposites attract and sometimes last. People were curious. People liked stories with anniversaries. They didn't know what story they were walking into. Not yet. I rented out a tucked-away event barn in West Asheville. Rustic elegance, with just enough charm to make Erin feel like she couldn't protest the venue, but enough space for me to control the optics. People would talk there. And listen. I hired the same string trio that played at our wedding. Booked a small caterer who owed me a favor from when I loaned him startup gear for his food truck. The whole thing came in under budget because when you've spent 20 years giving favors, people tend to remember. I didn't tell Erin the details. She didn't ask. She was too busy covering her tracks. 2 nights before the party, she left town again. Some last-minute audit in Raleigh. I knew the drill. She packed light. Perfume, jade bracelet, navy dress. Same rotation. Only this time, she left her laptop open in the den barely 5 minutes before she left. Probably thought I wouldn't notice. Or maybe she wanted me to see it, to test whether I'd do anything. I waited until her taillights disappeared down the drive. Then I opened the lid. No password. The browser was still on a Gmail tab. She hadn't logged out. There were no emails in her inbox. Nothing in the trash. But in the drafts folder? That's where the ghosts live. There were 3 unsent emails to Greg Tanner, all dated over the past 2 months. I hate how different I am when I'm home. He doesn't see me anymore. He just fills the space with noise. Part of me wishes he'd find someone else so I wouldn't have to be the villain. I stared at that last line for a long time. And for the first time, I didn't feel grief. I felt clarity. Because in her mind, she was the victim. She was waiting for me to make the first move, to give her a reason to wash her hands clean and walk away without guilt. She didn't understand yet. She was the one who'd already lit the match. And now, she was standing in a house full of dry timber. The next day, I had lunch with Lydia again. No excuses this time. No cover story. I just called and said, I could use your company. She came. We met at a small place near the Grove Arcade, outdoor patio, shady trees, quiet breeze. She wore a denim jacket over a sundress and had her hair down. No effort, and still beautiful in that understated, real way. She hugged me when she arrived. No hesitation. You okay? She asked. Not really, I said. But I'm not drowning anymore. She smiled, soft and sad. That's something. We talked for over an hour. Not just about Aaron, though that was the thread that tied everything. I told her about the party. That I was hosting it not out of love or nostalgia, but as chess. That every person in that room would play a role. That truth, real truth, would have its moment. No screaming. No fireworks. Just exposure. She didn't try to talk me out of it. She just said, You're sure? Yeah. I need her to feel what I've felt for years. Powerless. Watched. Alone in a crowd. Lydia nodded, then reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Not romantic. Not seductive. Just human. It had been years since someone touched me like that without expectation. And I think she knew. The day of the party, Aaron came home mid-afternoon. She looked exhausted. Not just physically. Spiritually. I watched her unpack her bag in the bedroom, neatly lining up every toiletry in its usual spot. She didn't say a word about the trip. I didn't ask. We dressed in silence. She wore deep navy silk. Same color as the dress in the travel notes. I wore gray. No tie. Open collar. I looked like myself, only sharper. Before we left, she stood in front of the mirror and adjusted her earrings. You didn't forget the gift bags, right? She asked without turning. No, I said. They're in the trunk. She nodded. Good. We didn't speak again until we were in the car. The venue was lit by late sun and soft music. Guests arrived right on time, laughing, hugging, handing us cards and flowers and bottles of wine. I watched Aaron float from guest to guest, mechanical smile in place, cheeks barely flushed. She was in control. She always had been. But not tonight. I made rounds. Greeted everyone. Thanked them for coming. Then I stood at the mic. Soft clinking of a fork on a glass. Chatter died down. Aaron froze across the room, eyes locked on me. I smiled. Not wide. Just enough to say, this is my stage now. Thank you all for coming. It means more than I can say. 20 years is a long time. And sometimes, what makes a marriage last isn't what we expect. It's not always love, or passion, or even trust. Sometimes it's just silence. The kind that grows. The kind that says everything by saying nothing. There was a flicker in Aaron's expression. Barely a twitch. But I saw it. The first crack. I won't take up too much of your time. I just want to say how grateful I am to all of you for witnessing our story. Even the parts that were hard to see. That was it. No accusations. No drama. Just the door creaking open. And behind it, a storm gathering. As the guests resumed eating, a few exchanged glances. Curious. Confused. And Aaron? She stood in the corner near the window, wine glass full, untouched. She looked like someone wondering how long her reflection had been lying to her. And I walked outside, where Lydia was waiting. She didn't ask about the speech. Not on the ride home. Not the next morning. She didn't ask if I meant anything by it. Because Aaron knew. She'd built her life on reading between the lines, financial disclosures, compliance flags, veiled language in quarterly reports. She didn't need me to say it outright. She knew the hammer was in the air, and she was just waiting for it to fall. But I didn't swing it yet. I let her sit with it. Let the silence stretch between us like piano wire. Tight, vibrating, dangerous. I kept smiling at breakfast. Kept bringing her coffee like I used to. Kept existing like everything was normal. Only now, she was the one unsure of her footing. For 20 years, I'd been the predictable one, the emotional one, the loud one. Now I was unreadable, and she couldn't stand it. That Monday, She skipped work. No explanation. Just stayed home, folded laundry that didn't need folding, and stared out the back window like the trees owed her answers. I came home early. She was in the kitchen, hands clenched around a mug of tea that had gone cold. "You're home," she said flatly. "Yeah. Slow day. Thought I'd mow the lawn." She nodded once. Then, as if fishing for something, "You seemed off at the party." I met her gaze, level. I just felt seen. She flinched, just for a second, then went back to staring at her tea. That night, she stayed in the guest room. No announcement. No argument. She just drifted down the hallway with a pillow and closed the door behind her like someone quitting a job. I didn't stop her. I just sat in the living room with a bourbon, staring at the framed photo of us in Black Mountain, taken during our second year of marriage. She looked young. I looked tired, even then. It hit me how long I'd been dragging this corpse of a relationship around, convincing myself it still had a heartbeat. The next morning, I opened my email and found a message from Lydia. "Hey, no pressure, but if you need someone to talk to, I'm around." I know what it feels like when the quiet becomes unbearable. That line stuck with me all day, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. I stopped by her place that weekend, brought her a few extra outdoor lanterns from the shop, one she'd been eyeing but never bought. We sat on her back porch, overlooking the trees. The air smelled like moss and something warm. She poured wine. I accepted. "You sure she doesn't know what's coming?" Lydia asked after a long silence. "She knows something's coming," I said. "She just doesn't know what I'll take with me when I leave." Lydia tilted her head. "Are you going to take everything?" "No," I said. "Just enough to leave an echo." I didn't sleep much that week, but I felt awake for the first time in years. I made another trip to my attorney, brought the final stack of receipts, photos, draft emails, travel logs, names of mutual friends who'd quietly confirmed they'd noticed things. Gina flipped through it all with the efficiency of someone who'd seen dozens of implosions dressed up in cocktail attire. "This will be enough," she said, "and more than enough for a fault-based filing." I asked her to wait on it. "One more week." She raised an eyebrow. "You planning something?" "Not planning," I said. "Positioning." Back at home, Erin had started retreating even deeper. No more small talk. No more logistics. She didn't ask about the store. Didn't ask where I was going at night. She was waiting, but not like someone preparing for war. More like someone standing on a cliff, hoping the drop wouldn't feel like a punishment. I left the divorce packet on the kitchen counter. Face down. No note. Just enough edge sticking out of the folder to catch her eye when she came in to make her morning toast. I watched her from the hallway. She froze when she saw it. Just stared, like it might move on its own. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She just sat down at the table, her hands perfectly still on either side of her coffee mug, and whispered, "Is this the part where you say I told you so?" I stepped into the kitchen. Calm. "No," I said. "This is the part where I stopped pretending." She didn't fight. Not with tears. Not with excuses. That would have required vulnerability. And Erin guarded her emotions like classified documents. Instead, she asked a question I didn't expect. "Is this because of her?" I blinked. "Her who?" She stared at me for a long beat. Cold. Quiet. Controlled. Then, "Lydia." That's when I saw it. The real pain. Not from being caught. Not from losing the marriage. From the idea that someone who knew her, someone who'd once admired her, might see something in me that she no longer did. That maybe I wasn't just a golden retriever after all. That maybe someone else saw me as a man worth loving. I didn't answer. I just walked past her, out to the porch. Let her sit there in the kitchen, surrounded by the life she gutted one decision at a time. I spent that night at Lydia's. Not in her bed. On her couch. We didn't kiss. We didn't flirt. We just existed in the same room without tension, without strategy, without masks. She gave me a blanket and said, "You don't have to explain anything." I said, "I don't have it in me to explain anymore." We watched a documentary on free solo climbers. At one point, the camera lingered on a man gripping a sheer cliff face by his fingertips. Lydia looked over and whispered, "That's what love feels like, doesn't it? When you're the only one holding on." I nodded, because she was right, and I was done climbing alone. Erin moved out quietly, 2 days after I left the divorce papers on the kitchen counter. No drawn-out argument. No performance. She packed in silence, box by box, and left one Saturday morning while I was out running stock at the shop. When I got home, there was a single envelope on the dining table. Inside was her wedding ring. No note. Just a metal circle we hadn't spoken about in years. The silence after she left wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. It echoed in the house, in the walls, in the spaces where her shoes used to sit lined up with surgical precision by the door. But it didn't hurt the way I thought it would. Because she'd been gone long before she packed that last box. Within a week, the lawyer filed everything formally. Fault-based, marital misconduct, and financial dissipation. Erin's name was now linked to a clean, bulletproof timeline of deception. And because of how methodically she tied her affair to business trips and joint resources, Gina said we had leverage in every negotiation. Assets, disclosures, reputation. And we didn't have to threaten anything. We just filed. The paperwork did what 20 years of begging and effort couldn't. It made her accountable. Lydia didn't ask me about the details. She never pressed. She just showed up, dropped off groceries, helped repaint the guest bedroom, sat with me on the porch while I said nothing and meant everything. We weren't sleeping together. We weren't confessing anything. But something was building. And this time, it wasn't born out of pain. It was respect. Mutual survival. A quiet kind of recognition. Around town, I started noticing things. Friends who used to greet Erin first now avoided her entirely. A colleague of hers from the regional bank came by the shop to pick up gear and mentioned, carefully, that some things were under internal review. I said nothing, but the implication was clear. Greg Tanner had been on a vendor list. He wasn't supposed to be. Lydia and I had dinner the following Friday. At her place. Not a date. Not exactly. She made roast chicken. I brought a bottle of wine someone gifted us at the party. We talked about everything but Erin. And that was the first time I felt like I'd finally stepped out of that woman's gravitational pull. Lydia didn't fill the air with platitudes or pick through the ashes of what I'd lost. She was just there, noticing what I liked, asking about the store, laughing at the dumb jokes no one else had time for. It felt like warmth, like something earned, not the replacement for something old, but the beginning of something real. That weekend, my lawyer forwarded me Erin's formal counterproposal. It was clean, reasonable, even. She didn't contest the misconduct claim, didn't push back on asset division, didn't demand the house. But she did request we agree to a joint statement if word got out. That told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't trying to protect our story. She was trying to control its ending. I declined the joint statement, submitted my own, unembellished. Just the facts. Let the filing speak. Let the bank, the board, the city read it how they wanted. There was nothing left to defend, because she'd spent years building a narrative in private. And now it was public. A few days later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Erin had taken a leave of absence from the bank. No one said why, but everyone knew. A name like Greg Tanner doesn't stay quiet once it's attached to fraud reviews and internal audits. And in a town like Asheville, even bankers drink at the same breweries. Even secrets end up in barstool conversations. One afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. It was Erin. I'm not calling to ask for anything. Just, don't let them make me into something I'm not. That's all. She sounded tired. Not panicked. Not angry. Just like someone who'd lost a version of herself and didn't know how to start over. I didn't call back. There was nothing left to say. That night, Lydia stopped by again. No pretext. Just a bottle of cider and a quiet smile. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't need to. We watched the sky darken from the back deck. No TV. No music. Just crickets, distant wind, the sound of branches shifting. She rested her head against my shoulder. And I finally breathed in a life that didn't hurt to hold.